The cold, damp air of the barn clung to everything, amplifying the sudden, sharp crack of wood. A body dropped to the earthen floor, a sound muffled yet final. For a moment, only the frantic beat of a single heart filled the vast silence dot in Holmes County. Ohio, 1962. Life moved to an ancient rhythm, dictated by sunrise, toil, and unwavering faith. But beneath the surface of this secluded, God-fearing community, a different kind of devotion was taking root, a dangerous silence, cultivated by men, endured by women. And one night, that silence reached its breaking point. Before we unravel this chill, the Zook farm lay nestled deep within the rolling expanse of Holmes County, Ohio. A landscape of fertile fields stitched together by narrow dirt roads, worn smooth by generations of buggies and horse hooves. In 1962, the world beyond its borders seemed a distant rumor, barely a whisper in the wind that rustled through the endless cornstalks. Here, life followed a rhythm older than memory, a steadfast adherence to plain dress, simple living, and a faith that shaped every waking hour. Weathered barns, groaning with the weight of decades, and filled with the mingled scents of hay. Livestock and dry earth stood sentinel over properties where families knew each other by the names of their cows as much as their own. Mornings broke with silent prayers offered up to the vast. Open sky, days melted into relentless labor until dusk, and lanterns were extinguished early, casting the entire community into a profound and pervasive quiet. This was a place where progress was measured in bountiful harvests, and the future seemed an echo of the past, unchanging, secure, and deeply rooted in tradition. The very air carried the scent of wood smoke from morning fires and the distant murmur of farm life, sounds that were comforting in their predictability, yet also binding not at the heart of one such property. Amidst fields stretching towards the horizon, stood Anna Zook, a man of 43 years whose face, etched with deep lines of labor and an unwavering conviction, rarely softened. His eyes, a shade of unforgiving gray, held a fixed intensity that seemed to penetrate rather than merely observe. His hands, thick and calloused from years of guiding the plow, felling trees, and mending fences, spoke of a life spent taming the earth. To the community of Belleville, Elias was an unshakable pillar, a respected leader whose pronouncements carried the undeniable weight of divine revelation. He spoke often of a voice, a sacred certainty, that guided his path and clarified the often murky scriptures, delivering these messages with a quiet authority that brooked no dissent. When he spoke of these perceived divine instructions, his gaze would take on an unblinking intensity, his jaw set firm, conveying an absolute and dangerous certainty. He moved with a deliberate, heavy pace, his broad shoulders and unyielding posture projecting an authority that seemed to settle heavier than the very air around him. When he stood in the doorway of the meeting house, or at the head of a communal gathering, his presence was a weighty anchor in the stillness, commanding a silent, unquestioning respect from all who observed him. His stern piety, outwardly admired, cast a long shadow. Beside him, though always a few steps behind, was Anna Zook. At 29, her face held a quiet, almost fragile beauty, often veiled by an expression that allowed few smiles to escape. Her eyes, the color of wet earth after a spring rain, held a depth that belied her usually placid demeanor, a quiet sorrow that seemed to live just beneath the surface. Her thin hands, calloused not from field work, but from endless domestic tasks, moved with a weary grace. Her days were a tapestry woven from the threads of relentless duty, rising before the sun, tending to the hearth that radiated the comforting scent of dried corn and simmering stews, churning butter until her forearms ached, mending worn garments under the flickering lamplight, and guiding the small hands of her children Rebecca, 6, Sarah, 5, and young Jacob Jr., barely 3. She moved through the clapboard house with a silent efficiency, her movements practiced and deliberate, as if each chore was a fragile object she feared to break. Her life was a meticulously constructed shadow of normalcy, a delicate facade built around the demands of her daily existence, a carefully maintained illusion for the outside world, and most desperately, for the innocent eyes of her children within the walls of their home. The daylight hours on the Zook farm were a testament to order and tireless labor. The distant bleating of sheep mingled with the lowing of cattle in the pastures, sounds of life and production. Anna would guide Rebecca and Sarah through their chores, teaching them the quiet arts of a farm wife, sweeping the wide plank floors until they shone, preparing vegetables from the garden for the evening meal, folding linens until their creases were sharp and precise. Sarah, with her soft voice, would often hum the church hymns she knew by heart as she helped, her small hands mimicking her mother's movements. Rebecca, more quiet and observant, would watch Anna's face, sometimes lingering a moment too long. Young Jacob Jr. would play near her feet, his wooden toys clattering softly against the floorboards, his innocent laughter occasionally puncturing the otherwise industrious silence. The sun, a tireless overseer, painted the fields in shades of green and gold, reflecting off the clean window panes of the farmhouse. Neighbors would pass on their buggies, the rhythmic clop of horses' hooves echoing down the dirt road, offering a wave or a brief, respectful nod to Elias as he worked the fields with unwavering focus, his figure a stoic silhouette against the sky. There was an unspoken agreement of mutual support, a sense of unbroken peace that had endured for generations, promising continuation and stability. Yet, as dusk began to settle, casting long purple shadows across the landscape, the character of the silence on the Zook farm shifted subtly, a barely perceptible tremor beneath the meticulously maintained surface. The golden light faded, giving way to the deep, encroaching shadows that stretched across the fields, crept up the clapboard walls, and finally infiltrated the deepest corners of the home. The day's normalcy, so carefully constructed and maintained, began to thin, revealing the faint, unsettling outline of something else beneath. The sound of crickets crescendoed, a buzzing chorus that seemed to intensify with the descending dark, and the distant, mournful call of an owl pierced the quiet, a sound that seemed to carry an ancient sorrow. The very air itself seemed to grow heavier, cooler, laden with unspoken expectation. It was then that Anna's movements would subtly change. Her hands, nimble and sure throughout the day, might hesitate for a fraction of a second when setting down a dish. Her gaze, which had been fixed on her tasks, would now drift to the windows, then to the heavy wooden door, a flicker of something unreadable, quick as a dragonfly's wing, passing through her eyes before she brought her attention back to her work with a visible effort. A slight tension would set in around her mouth, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw, a tremor that sometimes ran through her shoulders. The evenings held a different weight, a palpable density that pressed in from the dark fields and settled within the walls of the house. The children were tucked into their beds early, their soft prayers whispered against Anna's shoulder, their small breaths evening out into the deep, untroubled sleep of childhood. Anna would sit beside Rebecca and Sarah, her hand stroking their hair, a rare, tender gesture, until their eyelids grew heavy and their small bodies relaxed into slumber. She would then move to Jacob Jr.'s crib, gently rocking him, humming a wordless tune until his small snores filled the quiet room. Elias would retire to his own space, a small, sparsely furnished room off the main living area, where he would read his scriptures by the soft glow of a lantern, the low, rhythmic murmur of his voice, sometimes audible through the thin walls, a sound that offered no comfort to Anna. Anna would clean the last supper dishes, the quiet clinking of porcelain, a stark contrast to the profound tension that now permeated the air. She would meticulously secure the latches on the doors, check the windows, and bank the coals in the hearth, her actions deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if performing a protective spell. The house, which had hummed with the gentle life of a family during the day, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting, expectant. She had learned to survive these nights, not to live, but to endure. There was a specific quality to the stillness that preceded the sound of footsteps on the porch, a crunch of gravel on the pathway, a faint, almost imperceptible creak of the floorboards outside the main door, a particular whisper of the wind that carried the faint scent of another man's pipe tobacco, or of damp earth and stale sweat, a scent that clung to the evening air. The absence of Elias during these times was a given. He would be in his study, or perhaps he would simply not be noticed. No candles, however brightly lit, could disperse the gathering shame that seemed to emanate from the very walls, clinging to the air like a shroud. No words, however reasoned, could staunch its rising tide within her. She would wait, a stillness born of long, agonizing practice, her body held rigid beneath the thin blankets in her bed, her breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. The touches came at Anna had learned obedience. It was not a choice, but a stark and unwavering necessity, a deeply ingrained law within the unspoken logic of that house, a silent agreement forged in fear. She had learned, through bitter experience, that resistance, even the faintest tremor of protest, brought only harsher consequences, a deeper chill in Elias's already reserved demeanor, a sharper edge to the silence that followed, an increased isolation that felt like a physical weight pressing down upon her, making the very air difficult to breathe. Her small, desperate acts of defiance, long ago, had been met not with overt violence, but with a cold, cutting withdrawal that felt more punishing than any blow, a deliberate erasure of her presence, her worth. So she obeyed, her body a vessel, her mind a distant, fragmented thing that floated somewhere above the scene, observing, counting the seconds, longing for the intrusion to pass. Her eyes would often unfocus, her gaze distant, as if her true presence had receded from her own body, leaving only a shell behind to endure. The community, meanwhile, continued its daily rituals, its shared prayers, its communal labor in the fields, all beneath a meticulously woven veil of normalcy. The secret, a festering wound beneath the fabric of their quiet lives, remained hidden, protected by a silence so profound it felt like a force of nature, an insurmountable wall of complicity. The fear became a constant, suffocating companion, a silent shadow clinging to her every movement, a cold mist that seeped into her very bones. It infiltrated the comforting scent of the dried corn stored in the larder, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, the warmth of the hearth on a cold morning. Even the rustle of the leaves outside her window carried a hint of dread, a whispered warning that coiled itself around her thoughts. Her world, once expansive with the simple joys of motherhood and domesticity, had shrunk to the confines of mere survival, a narrow tunnel of fear. Each sunrise was a brief, fragile reprieve, a temporary lifting of the weight, but each sunset brought a creeping dread that coiled in her stomach, tightening with every fading ray of light. The strong light of day, however bright, could not quite dispel the deep-seated chill that had taken root within her, a quiet, dangerous ice that threatened to shatter her composure at any moment. This was the routine of terror, not spoken aloud, not confessed in a whisper to a trusted friend, but observed in the slight tremble of her hands as she kneaded dough, in the way her gaze would always return, almost instinctively, to the closed door, and in the profound, impenetrable stillness that became her default state, a shell of the woman she once was. Her sleep was fractured by unseen terrors, leaving her weary even after a night of rest. The world outside, the world of neighbors and shared harvests, remained oblivious or willfully blind, shrouded in the quiet devotion that defined Holmes County. But within the Zook farmhouse, a different story was being written, one touch, one silent breath, one unbearable night at a time. The very air thickened with unspoken horrors, the weight of secrets pressing down. The quiet chill that had settled over the Zook farm deepened with the deepening night. Outside, the last sliver of moon had dipped below the horizon, leaving the vast, open landscape to the dim, scattered light of distant stars, which glittered with cold indifference. A biting wind, carrying the faint scent of decaying leaves and wet earth, rustled through the skeletal branches of the apple trees near the orchard, making them creak like old bones. Inside the farmhouse, a profound stillness reigned, broken only by the rhythmic, soft breathing of the children in their beds, and Elias's occasional turning in his separate room, the sound barely audible through the thin walls. Anna had completed her nightly chores, her movements precise and hushed, each task a quiet act of resignation. The last ember in the hearth cast a faint, flickering glow across the worn floorboards of the main room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. As she moved towards the rear door, her steps almost soundless. Tonight, like so many nights before, held the specific dread she had come to recognize, a heavy cloak woven from silence, a chilling anticipation, and the pervasive, unseen expectation that pressed in on her from all sides. Her hands, which had meticulously folded clean linens just an hour before, now trembled almost imperceptibly as she unlatched the heavy wooden door. A faint crunch of gravel, then the soft, deliberate tread of boots announced an arrival on the pathway leading from the main road to the barn. The footsteps carried the undeniable weight of a man who believed his presence was not just expected, but entirely entitled, a right beyond question. The air itself seemed to grow denser, colder, as Jonas Troyer, a man of 38 with a reputation for unwavering self-assurance in the community, made his way across the yard. His figure was a dark silhouette against the barely discernible shapes of the sleeping animals in the adjacent pasture, a solid form moving with unwavering purpose. There was a practiced cadence to his approach, a certainty in each step that spoke of a routine long established and never challenged. The barn door, which often creaked protestingly under less careful hands, opened and closed with an unusual quietness, as if the aged wood itself had learned to hold its breath, to offer no resistance to the nightly ritual. Anna, upon hearing the familiar, dreaded sounds, had already moved towards the barn. Her steps were mechanical, almost ghost-like, across the frost-kissed ground, each footfall leaving a faint imprint on the damp earth. The short distance between the house and the barn felt like a chasm, each step a descent into an inevitable darkness, a surrender. The scent of hay, dust, and animal warmth usually permeated the barn, a familiar, comforting aroma of farm life. Tonight, however, it seemed to carry a metallic tang beneath the comforting earthiness, an unidentifiable sharp note that grated on her senses. The massive wooden doors, worn smooth by countless hands and scarred by seasons of use, stood as a dark gateway to what had become a recurring nightmare, a place where the familiar comfort of the farm was twisted into something else entirely. Inside the barn, the darkness was absolute, save for a narrow shaft of moonlight that pierced a forgotten gap in the wooden wall high above, casting a faint, ethereal column of dust, motes into the air. This sliver of light illuminated nothing of consequence, only amplifying the surrounding gloom. The sturdy beams and rough-hewn timbers of the barn structure loomed overhead, disappearing into the blackness, forming a cavernous, oppressive space. The air was thick and still, carrying the scent of dried alfalfa and the low, restless shifts of the animals in their stalls, a horse snorting softly, a cow shifting its weight, the rustle of straw. Jonas was already there, a darker shape within the deepest shadows, his presence a heavy weight in the oppressive quiet, his form barely visible. He stood near a familiar pile of loose hay, the usual spot where the unspoken transactions occurred. Anna moved towards him, her body performing the familiar ritual of compliance, her mind a blank space she sought to retreat into, a desperate attempt at self-preservation. Her shoulders were hunched, her head slightly bowed, her posture a testament to years of enforced humility. The initial movements were always the same, a cold, practiced familiarity that had become ingrained in her very being. The brief, rough touch of his hands on her arms, the silent expectation in the way he moved to guide her, the subtle shift of weight. Anna's body responded with the learned passivity, a long-honed strategy of survival, a means of enduring. She focused her senses on external details, the coarse texture of the hay beneath her fingers, the distant sound of a horse snorting in its stall, the tiny scrape of a mouse in the rafters, anything to detach herself from the immediate, unbearable reality. This was the tacit agreement, a silent performance of degradation that had been repeated countless times. Her eyes were unfocused, looking past Jonas's shoulder at the vague, imposing outline of a heavy pitchfork leaning against the barn wall, a silent sentinel in the gloom, its tines glinting faintly in the sparse light. She would often fixate on such inanimate objects, allowing them to become anchors in her fractured awareness. But tonight, a subtle, terrifying shift occurred. A change in the pressure of Jonas's hands, a different angle in his movements, communicated a demand that deviated sharply from the established, unspoken terms of the arrangement. His grip tightened with a sudden, painful force, pulling her into a position It was both unfamiliar and deeply invasive. An attempt to force a penetration from behind. A violation that went beyond even the usual unbearable script. A sudden, sharp, ice-cold jolt ran through Anna. Her body, trained for so long in submission, conditioned to endure, stiffened instantly. A primal, unbidden tremor coursed through her limbs, a deep, cellular rejection. This was a boundary, a line she had not known existed until it was about to be breached. A deeper descent into degradation than she had ever imagined. A sound, low and guttural, escaped her throat, not a word, but a raw, involuntary rejection that was more animalistic than human. She resisted, her body pushing back with a sudden, unexpected strength born of sheer, absolute desperation. Her hands, which had been passive and open moments before, clenched into fists, pushing against his chest with surprising force. Her head shook from side to side, a silent, vehement refusal that defied years of enforced obedience, a silent scream she could not voice. Jonas, accustomed to her unwavering compliance, seemed to falter for a fraction of a second, a moment of confusion and surprise in his aggressive movements. He pressed harder, his face contorted with a sudden, cold anger, ignoring her resistance, his breath heavy and labored in the close darkness, hot against her ear. The air in the barn, already thick with dust and animal scents, seemed to shrink, pressing down on Anna. Suffocating her. It was in that precise moment, as Jonas ignored her frantic, physical refusal and continued to force her into a position she abhorred. That something within Anna, long buried beneath layers of fear, resignation and quiet despair, began to fracture. A cold, steady surge of something other than terror began to rise within her, not a burst of heat, but a chilling clarity. It was a boiling current of suppressed fury, years of indignity and unspoken protest coalescing into a singular, undeniable force that vibrated through her entire being. Her eyes, wide and unfocused moments before, sharpened with sudden, terrible clarity, seeing not just the immediate threat, but the cumulative weight of every touch, every forced silence, every night of quiet degradation stretching back into memory. The barn, which had been a place of dread and despair, became a crucible, an arena where something ancient and dangerous had been awakened. Her gaze darted, frantic and desperate, across the dark, familiar space. Her eyes landed on an object. A piece of firewood, thick and gnarled, lay half buried in the loose hay near a stack of seasoned timber, a heavy, splintered remnant from a previous splitting chore. It was stout, solid, and crucially within arm's reach. Its rough surface and formidable weight spoke of raw, unrefined power. Without a conscious thought, driven by an instinct far older than her learned obedience, a primordial spark of self-preservation, her hand shot out, grasping the rough wood. The sudden, decisive movement was a rupture in the pattern of her life, a shattering of the practiced stillness, a silent declaration. Jonas, still pressing his advantage, caught off guard by the swift, unexpected action, let out a grunt of frustration. As he leaned into her, his attention focused on his cruel intent, Jonas's body stiffened, a choked gasp escaping his lips, a sound of utter disbelief. His eyes, momentarily wide with shock and a dawning comprehension, stared blankly into the darkness for a fleeting instant. His grip on Anna instantly slackened, his hands falling away from her. He swayed for a moment, a tall, dark silhouette teetering precariously, his balance abruptly lost, before his legs gave out beneath him with a sickening suddenness. He crashed to the earthen floor, his head striking the packed earth with a dull, sickening thwack that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the barn. The sound resonated through Anna's very bones, vibrating in her chest. He lay still, disturbingly so, amidst the scattered hay and dust, his body a silent, inert mass. A dark, viscous stain began to spread slowly, inexorably from beneath his head, growing larger even in the sparse moonlight filtering through the... Anna stepped out of the barn, leaving the still form of Jonas Troyer behind. The piece of wood lay on the hay, an inert instrument of a sudden, brutal ending. The night air, sharp with the scent of frost and damp earth, offered a cold embrace. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, a frantic, echoing drum in the profound quiet. But the tremor in her hands had begun to settle. A chilling resolve, cold and clear as the deepest winter sky, had replaced the paralyzing fear. There was no going back, only forward into the unforgiving darkness. The world she had known, built on submission and silent endurance, had irrevocably shattered in the barn. Now a new world, born of blood and fire, demanded to be forged. Her gaze swept across the moonless yard, past the darkened farmhouse where her children and Elias slept. Her eyes settled on the woodpile, a familiar mound of split logs stacked neatly near the side of the barn, awaiting the next day's hearth. Nestled among the logs was a heavy wood-cutting axe, its polished steel head glinting faintly in the almost total darkness, a tool of daily labor transformed by circumstance. Her steps, which had been mechanical earlier, now possessed a grim, unwavering purpose. She walked directly to the woodpile, her movements fluid and decisive. Her fingers wrapped around the smooth, worn wooden handle of the axe. The cold steel of the blade felt heavy, substantial, a physical manifestation of the terrible weight that had just lifted from her soul, replaced by a different, colder burden. The axe was not just an implement. It was an extension of the fierce, unyielding will that now coursed through her veins. Without a backward glance at the barn or the house, Anna turned and walked away from her farm. The dirt road, a faint ribbon through the fields, stretched out into the oppressive darkness of Holmes County. The journey was long, the distances between properties considerable in this sparsely populated land. The only sounds were the soft crunch of her boots on the frozen earth, the distant howl of a lone coyote, and the relentless driving beat of her own heart. The axe, held firmly in her grasp, swayed slightly with her deliberate pace. The faint metallic scent from the barn now clung to her, a phantom echo of what had occurred, mixing with the damp scent of the night. Her plain dress, usually immaculate, was already stained with the dark. Wet marks of blood from the hay and Jonas's body. A chilling omen of the path she now walked on. Her first destination was the farm of Samuel Yoder, a man of 41, known for his close ties to Elias and his quiet, almost deferential manner. Samuel lived a few miles down the winding dirt road, his property marked by a distinct row of tall, narrow poplars that stood like sentinels against the horizon. The journey felt both endless and fleeting, each step a further commitment to the terrifying path she had chosen. The darkness offered a cloak of invisibility, shrouding her as she moved between the sleeping homesteads. She approached Samuel's farmhouse, a 2-story structure with a broad porch. As in most homes in this trusting community, the door was not locked. The belief in communal safety, in the shared faith that bound them, meant such precautions were often deemed unnecessary. A testament to a world that was now irrevocably broken, Anna pushed the door open with a quiet, deliberate shove. The hinges creaked softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the profound stillness of the house. The interior was dark, cold, and silent. She moved through the entryway, her senses sharpened, her steps light. The smell of wood smoke and stale cooking lingered in the air. She passed into the main living area, then into a small study. A lantern, left burning low on a table, cast a dim, amber glow. What she saw was not within the confines of a bedroom, but closer to the entrance. Samuel Yoder lay sprawled on the floor of his small study, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Beside him, closer to the hearth, lay his wife Martha, her plain nightgown askew. There was no sign of struggle, only the chilling stillness of death. A dark, congealed pool of blood had spread on the wooden floorboards around Samuel's head. His wife lay unmoving, a single deep wound visible on her side. Anna's gaze lingered for a moment, seeing the silent testament to the Pact's first wider consequence. The axe felt heavier in her hands. She turned and left the Yoder farmhouse, the quiet creak of the door closing behind her, leaving the scene to the profound silence of the night. The next destination was the farm of Aaron Beachy, a man of 40, often described as devout, who had been known to justify the Pact as a trial of the flesh for the men involved. His farm lay further still, a longer, more arduous trek through the unyielding darkness. Anna's boots crunched on the frozen ground, her breath fogging in the frigid air. The axe, a cold weight, swung with each determined step. Her plain dress, already stained, now carried the fresh, coppery scent that seemed to cling to her like a second skin. The exhaustion of the night had not yet fully set in. Instead, a cold, almost detached clarity had taken hold. She was moving with a terrible purpose, an engine of reckoning. Aaron Beachy's farmhouse was larger than Samuel's, set back from the road behind a small cluster of bare oak trees. Again, the front door was unsecured. Anna entered, moving through the unfamiliar space with the stealth of a predator. The house was even colder than the Yoder home, suggesting a deeper sleep or a more recent settling into the night. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth emanated from one of the bedrooms on the upper floor. She ascended the wooden stairs, each creak a loud punctuation in the stillness. In the master bedroom, Aaron Beachy lay in a deep slumber beside his wife, their forms barely visible in the profound darkness. Small, childlike snores emanated from a nearby room, indicating the presence of their sleeping family. There was no sound of a struggle, no cry. The axe rose and fell, swift and silent. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of fresh blood, quickly overpowering the clean scent of sleeping bodies. Anna moved through the room, then into the adjacent room where the children slept, completing the terrible task. The silence of the Beachy farmhouse was now absolute, an unnatural quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. From the Beachy farm, Anna continued her grim pilgrimage across the slumbering landscape of Holmes County. The cold seeped into her bones, but her movements remained precise, driven by a relentless internal current. Levi Miller, the local blacksmith at 36, known for his strong hands and 3 young children, was next. His house, close to his forge, offered the lingering smell of coal smoke and metal. The door, like the others, yielded easily. And Moses Lapp, 44, a distant neighbor who had consistently defended Elias in community meetings, his property a further, isolated trek. His home felt even more remote, the silence heavier. Finally, Daniel Stoltzfus, 39, the youngest among the 7, whose family lived in a smaller, newer house near the edge of the community. Each home became a scene of the same grim tableau, a repetition of silent entry and sudden, brutal violence. In each instance, Anna left behind the same chilling testament: unlocked doors, bodies found in various states of repose or sudden awakening, and the pervasive metallic scent of blood. The axe, its blade now dulled by its terrible work, was heavy with the evidence of her purgation. It was not a ritual, but a grim, methodical cleansing, a violent unraveling of the pact that had bound her. The fury, once a boiling current, had settled into a cold, relentless focused dot as the first faint suggestion of dawn began to paint the eastern sky with shades of bruised purple. Anna returned to her own farm. The familiar clapboard house stood silent, a dark silhouette against the barely lightening horizon. Her plain dress was now entirely soaked, clinging to her a grotesque tapestry of dark stains. Her hands, still clutching the axe, were sticky and cold, covered in the same dark sheen that coated the blade. She walked directly to the farmhouse, her steps slower now, each movement a profound effort. The exhaustion, held at bay by the terrible adrenaline of her mission, now began to creep into her limbs, a heavy, aching weight. She entered her own home through the rear door. The interior was still dark, the air cool and still. The faint smell of wood smoke from the hearth was undisturbed. Anna Zook, 43, lay sleeping peacefully in his separate room, oblivious to the carnage that had unfolded across the unsuspecting community. His quiet snores were a testament to his undisturbed slumber, a profound ignorance of the bloody reckoning that had just occurred. He was safe in the perceived sanctity of his authoritative masculinity, protected by the very silence he had helped to orchestrate. Anna moved towards his room, her steps dragging now, the axe still in her hand. The floorboards creaked softly under her weight. She stood over his sleeping form for a long moment, the dim light from the window beginning to filter in, revealing the dark stains on her dress, the glint of the axe. She reached out, her hands still sticky, and shook his shoulder. Anna Zook stirred, groaning softly, his eyes fluttering open, his gaze, heavy with sleep, slowly focused on the figure standing over him. His eyes widened, first with confusion, then with a dawning, terrible comprehension. He saw Anna, her face a mask of exhaustion and grim resolve, illuminated by the faint, nascent light. He saw her dress, utterly soaked in dark, drying blood. And then he saw the axe, held loosely in her hand, its blade a dark, glistening shape. A raw, guttural gasp tore from his throat. His eyes, usually so commanding, now showed a terror unlike any Anna had ever seen in them. He scrambled backward, away from her, a desperate, animalistic attempt to escape. He tried to rise, pushing himself off the bed, his movements clumsy and panicked. He stumbled, falling to his knees, then began to crawl towards the door, away from the silent, bloody apparition. But Anna was quicker, driven by a wellspring of accumulated fury, years of abuse and humiliation that had simmered beneath the surface finally boiling over. The quiet farmer's wife, whose body had been a vessel for others' desires, now moved with a swift, terrible grace. She caught him before he reached the door, bringing the axe down. The first blow connected with his back, a muffled, sickening thwack that seemed to dislodge the very air from his lungs. Elias cried out, a sound of shock and pain, falling forward onto the floor. But Anna did not stop. The blows succeeded each other, a brutal, relentless onslaught, born of decades of unspoken torment. Each swing of the axe was a release, a shattering of the chains that had bound her, a furious purging of every forced touch, every silent night. The sounds of impact were muffled, but relentless, echoing through the small room. She continued even after his body lay motionless, a formless mass on the floor, the blood spreading rapidly, merging with the blood that already stained her. When it was finally over, Anna Zook lay without life, his body a broken, inert vessel. Anna stood over him, the axe still in her hand, her shoulders heaving with the effort. Her plain dress was now entirely saturated, dripping in places, a testament to the brutal, terrible work. Her face was streaked with sweat and something else, a thin layer of grime. The exhaustion was absolute, a profound, bone-deep weariness that threatened to collapse her. But in her eyes, beneath the immense fatigue, there was a terrible calm, a deep, unsettling stillness. Her vengeance was consumed. The pact, the silent agreement, the torment had ended. Anna Zook lay without life on the floor of his small room, his body a broken, inert vessel amidst a growing darkness. Anna stood over him, the axe still in her hand, her shoulders heaving with the profound effort of her recent actions. Her plain dress, utterly saturated, dripped in places, a grotesque tapestry of dark, drying stains. Her face, streaked with sweat and grime, was a mask of extreme exhaustion. Yet, beneath the immense fatigue, her eyes held a terrible calm, a deep, unsettling stillness that seemed to absorb all sound, all light. Her vengeance was consumed, but the night and her terrible work were not yet finished. A faint sound, and a soft, small sniffle broke the absolute quiet. It was a child's cry, tentative and uncertain. From the shared bedroom, where Rebecca, Sarah, and young Jacob Jr. slept, the violent thuds and Anna's final, furious blows against Elias had pierced the fragile veil of their slumber. The crying intensified, becoming a whimpering, then a distinct, frightened wail. Anna's head snapped towards the sound, her body stiffening. The axe, still heavy in her hand, seemed to hum with residual energy. The door to the children's room creaked open, slowly, revealing small, hesitant figures. Rebecca, at 6, was the tallest, her small hand clutching Sarah's, who was 5. Behind them, barely visible, was Jacob Jr., 3, his small face scrunched in confusion and fear, his whimpers louder now. Their eyes, wide and sleep-addled, peered into the dim hallway, drawn by the unsettling sounds that had invaded their peaceful sleep. They saw the flickering light from Elias's room. Hesitantly, Rebecca led her younger siblings towards the light. Their bare feet padded softly on the cold floorboards. They reached the doorway of Elias's room, their small bodies framed against the barely lightening gloom of the hallway. The scene before them was one of disorienting chaos. Anna stood in the middle of the room, her figure dark and imposing, drenched in an unidentifiable darkness. The axe, still in her grip, cast a chilling reflection in the faint light. On the floor, a large, formless mass lay prone, amidst a spreading, deep red stain. It was Elias. His face was obscured, but his stillness was absolute, unnatural. The children, still half asleep, their minds unable to fully process the horror, stared. Rebecca's eyes widened, a flicker of true fear finally registering. But Sarah and Jacob Jr. merely cried, a raw, instinctual fear of the unfamiliar. Anna slowly lowered the axe, letting its heavy head rest against the floor with a soft thud. The sound, though quiet, made the children jump. Her eyes, still holding that terrible calm, moved from Elias's body to their small, frightened faces. A profound shift occurred in her expression. The icy resolve softened, a flicker of something akin to broken tenderness passing over her features, quickly veiled by the exhaustion and the grim purpose that still lay beneath. Her voice, when it came, was low, a whisper that seemed to absorb the lingering echoes of violence. She spoke soft, soothing sounds, words that were meant to calm, though they carried an underlying tremor. She made a gesture with her free hand, a gentle motion, a beckoning. The children, startled but accustomed to their mother's quiet authority, responded to her call. Rebecca, still holding Sarah's hand, moved forward, her gaze occasionally darting back to the still form on the floor. Jacob Jr. stumbled behind them, his cries subsiding into whimpers as he focused on his mother's presence. Anna knelt, dropping the axe with a dull clatter. She opened her arms, and the children hesitantly moved into her embrace. Her blood-soaked dress brushed against their clean nightclothes, a chilling contrast. She held them close for a long moment, her body a strange mixture of warmth and cold dread. Her hand gently stroked Rebecca's hair, then Sarah's, then rested on Jacob Jr.'s small head. She stood, guiding them, her hands holding theirs. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if she were protecting them from something unseen. She led them away from Elias's room, past the dark stain, through the main room, and back to their own bedroom. The house remained silent, a tomb of shattered innocence. In their small, familiar room, the children's beds awaited them. Rebecca's small cot, Sarah's slightly larger one, Jacob Jr.'s crib. Anna gently guided each child to their respective bed. Rebecca and Sarah lay down, still sniffling, their fear slowly giving way to the exhaustion of sleep. Jacob Jr. was already drifting, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes heavy. Anna sat on the edge of Rebecca's bed, her bloodied dress a stark contrast to the clean quilt. She hummed a wordless lullaby, a faint, broken tune, as she stroked their foreheads. The gentle rhythm and her presence, however stained, worked their magic. One by one, their small breaths deepened. Their eyelids closed, and they drifted back into the profound, untroubled sleep of childhood, utterly unaware of the terror that had just unfolded, and the horror that still awaited them. Anna sat there for a long time, watching them, her face illuminated by the faint, growing light of dawn filtering through the window. The tenderness that had briefly appeared was now mixed with an icy, dangerous resolve, colder and sharper than before. Her eyes, still holding that terrible calm, surveyed her sleeping children. Rebecca, small and earnest. Sarah, sweet and prone to singing. Jacob Jr., innocent and utterly dependent. The violence she had just enacted had been a release, a purgation, but it had also opened her eyes to the inescapable reality of their future, humiliations, judgments, possible vengeance from the families she had just decimated. A life of shame, branded by the unspeakable acts of their father and the horrific response of their mother. The weight of it pressed down on her, heavier than the axe had ever been dot. It was in that quiet, dawning moment that Anna made her most drastic, terrible decision. She would spare them. Not from her, but from the world she had just shattered. It was a choice born of a desperate, twisted love, a cruel economy to prevent an even greater suffering. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each action a step deeper into the abyss she had chosen. She rose from the bed, her blood-soaked dress rustling faintly. She moved to the corner of the room, near the old wooden chest, where Elias kept the family's hunting rifle. It was a single-shot, breech-loading shotgun, heavy and well-maintained. Her hands, still sticky with drying blood, reached for it. The cold steel of the barrel, the warm wood of the stock, felt strangely familiar, a tool for a final, irreversible purpose. She opened the breech, checked the chamber, then closed it with a soft click, a sound that seemed to echo loudly in the quiet room. She approached Rebecca's bed first. Rebecca lay on her side, her small face peaceful, her breathing even. Anna stood over her, the shotgun held steady, her gaze fixed on the innocent form. There was no hesitation, no outward struggle. The muzzle of the shotgun was brought close. A muffled report, sharp yet contained within the small room, broke the silence. Rebecca's small body jerked, then settled, utterly still. Anna's face remained unreadable. She then moved to Sarah's bed. Sarah lay on her back, one arm thrown out, her lips slightly parted as if whispering a hymn in her sleep. The same grim stillness, the same terrifying resolve. The shotgun rose, then fell. Another muffled report, quickly absorbed by the thick quilts and the heavy wooden furniture. Sarah's body, too, settled into a final, undisturbed repose. Finally, Anna approached Jacob Jr.'s crib. He lay nestled, his small body curled, thumb still in his mouth. He looked utterly vulnerable, utterly innocent. Anna paused, her gaze lingering on his tiny sleeping form for a moment longer than with his sister's. Her resolve did not waver. The shotgun was brought close. A third muffled report. Jacob Jr. stirred for a fleeting instant, a soft sigh escaping his lips. Then he too became perfectly still. The room was now silent, a silence more profound and terrible than any that had come before. 3 small bodies lay motionless, spared from a future that Anna believed would be unendurable. She stood in the middle of the room, the shotgun heavy in her hands, her dress a dark, blood-soaked shroud. The terrible economy was complete. The air, heavy with the metallic scent of blood, was also imbued with an indescribable emptiness. She walked out of the children's room, leaving the door ajar. The shotgun was carefully placed against the wall in the main room. Her hands, still trembling slightly, were now sticky with a fresh, deeper layer of horror. She moved to the small writing desk in the corner, where Elias often handled farm accounts. On it lay a piece of plain white paper and a quill pen, its nib freshly dipped in ink. With slow, deliberate movements, her trembling hands picked up the quill. The ink seemed to flow reluctantly from the nib onto the paper. The act of writing was arduous, each stroke of the quill a monumental effort. Her hands ached, her mind felt profoundly weary, but the words needed to be set down, a final testament. The letter was detailed, a chilling confession and an indictment. Her handwriting, usually neat and precise, was now jagged, the letters uneven, betraying the immense strain under which she labored. She wrote about the false prophet, her husband Elias. She unmasked his lies, his perversion of faith, the insidious pact he had forged with the other men. She detailed the complicity of the brothers, the 7 men who had silently participated in her torment. She articulated the unbearable weight of having been shared property, a thing to be used and discarded, stripped of all dignity. The letter refuted any justification, any twisted claim of divine blessing or biblical passage that Elias had used to sanction their actions. She made it clear, God did not speak to me. God did not ask this. It was not a plea for absolution, but a desperate explanation, a final, unvarnished truth. I merely made them stop. It was a confession, an accusation, and finally, a profound, weary resignation to her chosen path. When the last word was written, the last drop of ink laid on the paper, Anna pushed the quill aside. The letter lay on the desk, a stark document in the pale dawn light. She rose, her body stiff with cold and exhaustion, and turned away from the house. Her steps were slow, heavy, as she moved towards the barn once more. Jonas Troyer's body was still there, a dark heap in the hay, unnoticed. Her gaze lifted to the sturdy main beam that spanned the width of the barn. Hanging from it was a thick rope, used for hoisting bales of hay or perhaps for securing livestock. With a methodical, chilling determination, she moved to the rope. Her hands, still stained, reached up, her fingers working with a grim efficiency. The rope was tied securely to the beam, then fashioned into a crude noose. Her final act of liberation awaited her. Anna's final act of liberation was swift and silent in the hushed cavern of the Zook barn. The crudely fashioned noose, thick and rough against her skin, was adjusted with a practiced, almost detached efficiency. She stood on an overturned wooden crate, her eyes fixed on the sturdy main beam overhead, a dark silhouette against the barely filtering dawn light. The last breath drawn, her body swayed, then fell into a final terrifying stillness. The rope tightened, absorbing the last vestiges of life from her already weary form. The barn, which had witnessed the beginning of her torment and the brutal end of Jonas, now held the final silence of Anna Zook, a heavy, suffocating quiet. The sun rose over Holmes County, casting long, golden rays across fields that had just hours ago witnessed unimaginable horrors. The early morning air, usually vibrant with the sounds of farm life stirring, chickens clucking, cows lowing, children's distant calls, was unnervingly quiet. No plumes of smoke rose from the chimneys of many homesteads. No buggies set out on their morning rounds. A few early risers, venturing out to tend to their chores, noticed something amiss. A buggy left haphazardly on a dirt road, its horse missing. A barn door ajar where it should have been secured. A distinct lack of movement from a usually bustling household. The silence profound and unsettling. The first discovery came not from the Zook farm, but from the Yoder property a few miles down the winding dirt road. A neighbor, passing by to borrow a tool for mending a fence, found the Yoder's front door unlocked and slightly ajar, an unusual sight in this trusting community. A quiet call went unanswered. The neighbor stepped inside, his brow furrowed with mild concern, which quickly transformed into profound dread. Samuel Yoder and his wife, Martha, lay still in their study, their bodies twisted in an unnatural repose, a dark, congealed pool staining the wooden floorboards. The air in the room was heavy, thick with a coppery metallic scent. Panic, a rare and potent force in this insular community, began to spread like wildfire. The unspoken codes of quietude and self-reliance fractured under the weight of such an unthinkable discovery. Telephones, a modern intrusion in many Amish homes, but present in some for emergencies, began to ring with frantic urgency. Law enforcement, a small, local sheriff's department, largely unaccustomed to anything beyond petty theft or livestock disputes, was quickly summoned. The first deputy to arrive at the Yoder farm found the scene disturbing in its stillness, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm on his hip, a gesture rarely made in Holmes County. He exchanged grim glances with the bewildered neighbors who had gathered, their faces etched with shock and disbelief as the morning progressed. Under the cold, indifferent gaze of the rising sun, the full scope of the tragedy began to unfold. More frantic calls came in, more horrifying discoveries were made. The Beachy farmhouse, where Aaron Beachy and his entire family were found. The Miller home. The Lapp farm, isolated and quiet. The Stoltzfus property, smaller and newer, also bore the marks of the night's terror. Each scene echoed the last with a chilling consistency. Front doors left unlocked. Bodies discovered in their sleep or in the sudden, brutal shock of awakening. A pervasive silence broken only by the hushed whispers of the responding officers. The Amish community, known for its deep trust and reliance on communal security, reeled under the weight of such unprecedented violence. The idea that their homes, usually sacrosanct and open to all, could become sites of such horror shook their very foundations. The handful of officers, their faces growing paler with each new discovery, were overwhelmed by the sheer scale and methodical brutality of the events. The pattern was undeniable and chillingly clear. The victims were all men of the Pact, and their families had been targeted as well. A comprehensive purge, the trail of carnage, grim and undeniable, inevitably led back to the Zook farm. The first officers to arrive found the property eerily silent, the livestock quiet in their stalls, the farmhouse door, like the others, ajar. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, a palpable dread that seemed to emanate from the very earth. Inside, the quiet horror continued. Elias Zook lay in his small room, his body broken and still, a scene of shocking violence that spoke of accumulated rage. The discovery of the children in their shared bedroom, Rebecca, Sarah, and Jacob Jr., lying motionless in their beds, their innocent faces untouched by the violence that had claimed them, deepened the incomprehensible tragedy. Officers exchanged quiet, horrified whispers. Their usual composure shattered. Then, on the small writing desk in the corner of the main room, bathed in the pale, nascent light of morning, they found it, a single sheet of plain white paper, covered in a hesitant, almost desperate hand. Anna's letter. It was carefully removed, handled with a reverence born of profound shock and the dawning realization of its significance. The words, though unevenly scrawled, were clear, searing, a raw and potent truth etched onto the page. It was not merely a confession. It was an accusation that tore open the carefully constructed facade of Holmes County. The letter spoke of Alias's perversion of faith, his cruel deception, and the insidious pact he had forged with the 7 men of the community. It detailed her unwilling role as shared property, the systematic degradation, the years of silent torment endured under the guise of religious sanction. It rejected any divine justification, stating plainly, in shaky, determined strokes, God did not speak to me. God did not ask this. I merely made them stop. It was a stark, unvarnished truth, a chilling testament to a profound violation and a desperate, violent response. The revelation of the pact, of the men's widespread complicity, shattered the community's illusion of moral purity, ripping away the comforting veil of righteousness. Finally, the search led to the Zook barn. Inside, 2 more bodies were discovered. Jonas Troyer, lying in the loose hay, a crude, heavy piece of wood nearby. And then, hanging from the sturdy main beam that spanned the width of the barn, Anna Zook, her body, still and silent, swayed almost imperceptibly in the faint breeze filtering through the gaps in the walls. a final terrible punctuation mark at the end of her bloody rampage. The axe, its blade dulled but encrusted with grim evidence, was found leaning against the wall in Elias's room, a silent witness to the night's terrible events. The scene was complete, the narrative laid bare. A woman, driven to unimaginable lengths by years of silent abuse and the ultimate betrayal, had executed a brutal, methodical vengeance before taking her own life in the very space where her torment had begun. The immediate aftermath was one of unprecedented upheaval. The truth, as revealed by Anna's letter, was a poison that seeped into the very soul of the community. The revered leader Elias, unmasked as a perpetrator of cruel perversion. 7 respected men, pillars of their faith, exposed as complicit in the systematic abuse of a woman. The shockwaves resonated through every family, every home. Accusations, whispers, and a profound sense of betrayal fractured the tight-knit social fabric. The communal trust, once an unshakable foundation of their way of life, crumbled into dust, leaving behind only suspicion and fear. No one could look their neighbors in the eye without wondering what unspoken horrors lurked behind their placid facades. What followed was an exodus. Within months, the placid landscape of Holmes County began to change dramatically. Families, unable to reconcile the horror with their deeply held beliefs, or perhaps unwilling to face the painful truth now laid bare, began to sell their lands, often at a significant loss. Houses that had stood for generations were suddenly empty, their windows staring blankly at the fields like vacant eyes. Wagons, loaded with meager possessions and carrying expressions of deep sorrow, quiet shame, and unshakable fear, began to roll down the dirt roads, leaving the community behind forever. The once cohesive network of families, connected by faith and blood, was now profoundly discontent and dispersed, each carrying the living memory of unlocked doors, of blood on familiar paths, and of the searing letter that explained it all. Where once there had been church hymns echoing across the fields and the rhythmic sounds of communal work, there now remained only a terrain of pervasive silence and averted gazes among former neighbors. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound to ever truly heal. Over the years, the Zook farm became a ghost of its former self. The clapboard house, once filled with the warmth of a family and the scent of baking bread, fell into severe disrepair. Windows shattered, paint peeled in long, curling strips, but the farm was not forgotten. As the decades passed, a new layer began to form over the bare facts, a shroud woven from fear, speculation, and whispered accounts. The Zook farm, and indeed the entire stretch of land where the killings occurred, became a local legend, a chilling urban myth passed down through generations. People who dared to venture near the deserted property years later spoke of strange occurrences, of unsettling phenomena. Lights, they claimed, would flicker on and off in the broken windows of the long-abandoned farmhouse, seen from the distant roads, like forgotten eyes staring out into the night. The faint, sorrowful echo of a child's crying was sometimes reported, carried on the wind through the tall, rustling cornstalks, a sound that chilled listeners to the bone. But the most persistent and terrifying apparition was that of a woman. She was seen, they said, a spectral figure moving silently between the rows of corn, her dress dark with what appeared to be blood, her hand clutching a spectral axe. Sometimes her indistinct form would emerge from the profound darkness of the barn, only to vanish into the dense foliage or the deep shadows of the collapsing structures. The reports multiplied, each one adding to the chilling tapestry of the legend, blurring the line between documented history and supernatural dread, without anyone being able to say for certain where memory ended and fear began. Anna's letter, carefully archived in dusty police files, endured. It became more than just a document of a crime. It transformed into an invitation to cruel reflection, a philosophical indictment. It served as a stark, chilling reminder of how power, especially when cloaked in distorted faith and the corrosive weight of communal silence, could utterly destroy lives and shatter a community to its core. It offered no easy answers, no simple condemnation, but rather a chilling expose of the mechanisms of control and abuse, a legacy of suffering. The abandoned houses, slowly consumed by the encroaching wilderness, stood as silent monuments to a lost way of life, to a community devoured by its own secrets. The Zook barn, even with the passage of time and the changing climate, maintained an aura of profound absence, a heavy, suffocating silence. The timbers groaned differently there, local lore claimed. The shadows clung to the beams with an unusual persistence. The sun eventually revealed the unspeakable. Across the waking farmlands of Holmes County, the silence of dawn was ruptured by a series of horrifying discoveries. One by one, the bodies were found, the unlocked doors yielding to neighbors and law enforcement, until the Zook farm laid bare the heart of the darkness. There, amidst the carnage, Anna's letter, a tremor of ink on paper, became the stark, uncompromising voice of the voiceless. It recounted the betrayal, the silent pact forged by men cloaked in piety, and the methodical, brutal destruction she enacted in response. Her final ascent in the barn, a grim silhouette against the rising dawn, marked the end of her ordeal and the indelible beginning of a haunting legacy. The once vibrant community, unable to withstand the corrosive truth that had festered beneath its placid surface for so long, dissolved into a profound exodus, its people dispersing across the land, leaving behind only vacant homes and the echoing weight of an unbearable truth. The Zook farm stands today, not merely as abandoned timber and overgrown fields, but as a chilling monument to the insidious power of unspoken truths. It reminds us that silence, when born of fear and complicity, can become a force more destructive than any act of overt violence, corroding the very foundations of trust and faith from within. It speaks of the subtle, insidious ways belief can be distorted, used as a shield for darkness, and how a community, by turning a collective blind eye, can unwittingly condemn its own to unimaginable suffering.